Welcome to this session of CSA. My name is Ashwin, and I am the founder and CEO of SCDR Incorporation. We are a CPA firm and a cybersecurity audit firm. We focus on SOC 2 audits, ISO IC certifications, and are a member of CSA for the past more than 5 years. I've been in the cyber security compliance domain for the past 22 years and 40 years of IT industry experience, having audited some Fortune 100 companies and SMBs also. And we have been focusing on cloud security for the past 10 years. And I'll let Swami introduce himself. Swami, please.
Yeah, I am Swaminathan R, Vice President of Compliance Audit at SDR, qualified MCA and certified CCSK SOC 2 auditor and ISO lead auditor in ISMS, BCMS, and PIMS area. I also conducted a lot of integrated audits for ISO, SOC 2, and CSA star audits. Now, over to Ashwin.
Okay, so let's look at the agenda for today. We're going to briefly discuss what's the CCM for, and then what is the audit and assurance controls. Then third is the CSPs and CSCs shared responsibility model, and then some security implementation best practices. And then we'll conclude this session for today. Next slide, please, Swami. So let's look at the CCM4 first. So just a brief overview. It's a research-driven framework by cloud customers, providers, and assurance professionals like us. It's a simplified approach to implementation, assessments, and compliances across all the clouds, aligned and mapped to global regulations and the most relevant security frameworks. It delineates security responsibilities for the CSPs and also provides a shared security model. It provides service delivery model for SaaS, PaaS, and IS as per most controls, different controls rather. And it's the backbone of the CSA Star program to assess and compare cloud service providers. So if we look at the high level view, right, it's a controls applicability metrics. We have implementation guidelines as part of the CCM. We have some core controls. We have a cake, which is a questionnaire based assessment for star level 1 certification. That is what it is used. We also provided auditing guidelines. There's a CCM light version also for those who would like to not implement all the controls. The SSRM guidelines also provided. It's the shared responsibility model guidelines. Then there are several mappings to SOC 2, the NIST 853, PCI-DSS, CIS, and many other benchmarks. And then there is also gap analysis and addenda. And we have metrics also to look at how you fare at your controls implementation. So these are the 17 domains as part of the CCM framework, starting from audit and assurance that we are going to discuss today. There are about 197 controls totally, and that encompasses control applicability and ownership, architectural relevance, cloud stack components, and organizational relevance. Like if you see, it is covering the entire domain of cybersecurity. Now, let's look at what are the audit controls, right? Audit and assurance controls. It has basically 6 control specifications. The first is audit and assurance policy procedures. So every company has a fundamental governance, basic policy and procedure. That is the first and foremost aspect of the control, right? We need to establish a policy, procedures, communication, how we're going to communicate. An example is an ISMS. If you're with ISO 27001, you are having an ISMS which has policies, procedures, and everything, right? Second is the independent assessments. So we need to conduct an independent assurance we need to have a methodology for doing an independent assurance, which is relevant to the standards at least annually. That is what the control provides. Third is the risk-based planning and assessment. So the the control suggests that we have a risk-based approach to policies and have an assurance mechanism which is based on the risk. So critical risks, high risks can have more emphasis, the medium risk can have a little lesser, and so on. Risk-based, that's how we are talking about risk-based assessments. Now, the fourth is compliance. Now, we know all know we have several compliance standards in terms of cloud security, in terms of privacy, in terms of the various US privacy mandates that are in for the last several years, and of course the GDPR and so on, right? So we need to look at what is applicable to us and what are our contractual legal requirements in terms of compliances, and then map our legal requirements to our policies, procedures, and our overarching requirements in terms of cloud security. Now, audit management process. Now, to manage all of these four items listed above, we also need to have our own internal policies and procedures as to how are we going to audit and how are we going to do the day-to-day management and scheduling and reporting and etc. So that is what we need to formulate a internal audit department or whatever the case may be to make sure that the audits and assurances internally are happening. Now, as part of every reporting, there would be gaps. There's no 100% cybersecurity, and there would be gaps in terms of our assessments based on the audits, based on the monitoring, based on the risk-based monitoring and metrics measurements, etc. And we need to have a remediation process as to how are we going to communicate, apply, evaluate, maintain those corrective action plans and audit findings and report those to the relevant stakeholders. That's what these six aspects at a high level cover. So then the next section is the cloud service providers and the cloud service customers control implementation responsibilities. This is part of the shared responsibility model, right, that the CCM framework provides us. So it is very important to understand that both the service provider as well as the consumer of the cloud services are responsible for this control, which has six control objective, which has gone to six control aspects that we have just seen. Now, to just give an example, specifically in small and medium companies, SMBs, startups with 5, 10, 15 people, 20 people, and so on, there's a misconception that if they are using Amazon or Google or Azure, right, everything is their responsibility and they need to do nothing about it, especially in the security perspective. So this aspect has changed little over the time, but still many few startups are not clear on the shared responsibility model. I would like to give a little more emphasis on this aspect to to the CSPs also and the CSCs also. Like if you typically if you're a SaaS company, right, the responsibility on the application level is yours, right? Similarly, the if you're an infrastructure company, you need to have a more responsibility at the infrastructure layer, and so on. Now, if you are a cloud service customer, right, you also need to have your own implementation and evaluation of the risks for every specific cloud service provider that you may have. You may have 10, 20, 50, 100, and you need to do a risk assessment or an independent assessment in terms of audit and assurance, in terms of all of those CSPs, right? Just because if it is Office 365 or maybe it is XYZ cloud provider, we can't take it for granted that because we have a cloud, everything is secure and we don't have a risk impact. We need to look at what data is getting stored there, what is the implication of those data, what is the replication of those data, where it is stored, whether it's complying with the geo location requirements for privacy, and so on. So that is an internal assessment that the CSCs need to do, and also have a mechanism to audit those CSPs if possible, or have a mechanism to get those controls and have an internal independent mechanism for creating an audit and assurance mechanism, and not just leave it at the CSP level and sign off on whatever they are signing, etc. So that is a risk assessment that all the CSCs also need to do before we sign up with any CSPs, and of course on the continuous monitoring basis. So these are some of the controls that I wanted to point out in terms of shared responsibility model. Now the next section is security implementation. Swami, can you take this section, please?
Yeah, thank you. So, as we understand that we have to implement audit and assurance controls as part of our implementation, we have to understand the risk involved if those controls are not implemented. If the first control, the audit policies and procedures control, is not implemented, there is a possibility of the organization getting legal fines and reputation damage. So for that, what is the best practice that the CSP and CSC to follow is that they should establish formal policies and procedures based on industry best practices and relevant standards in such as ISO IEC 27001 and AICPA Trust Service Criteria, SOC 2 to CSA star, all that they have to follow. Based on that, their policies and procedures need to be developed. And they also need to maintain audit charter in order to complete the audit process smoothly. Now, coming to the second control, where we need to implement the risk involved in not implementing the control of two, is that it provides conflict of interest and incompetent auditors conducting the audit. Here, what is happening is the auditor who is auditing the area should not be involved in its implementation of the control. So he should be independent person and he should have relevant qualifications to conduct the audit. So the best practice is that the CSP and CSC should regularly conduct independent assurance and audit activities. Audit activities should be conducted by a competent independent internal or external auditors. The organization and its service providers, service provisions include at least some audit activities throughout the year, and auditors should not audit their own area. Now, coming to the third control, if you don't implement control 3 of audit and assurance domain, then you are going to have an ambiguous scope risk and also inappropriate audit opinion. Basically, if your audit scope is not finalized and you conduct an audit, then the opinion given by the auditors for your audit will not be correct. So for that, what we need to do before we start our audit, we need to ensure that the scope is being identified correctly. And also while identifying the scope, we have to follow the risk-based approach. The CSP and CSC should adhere to operational activities and procedures in auditing and risk management standards. The A&A objectives and scopes are documented and communicated with adequate clarity. And also it should be communicated to relevant stakeholders. That also important aspects. Now, when audit control 4 is not implemented, that is the compliance part, if we are not identifying the required legal regulatory requirements and the compliances to be met for our business, then the CSP and CSC are bound to get into non-compliance with legal and regulatory requirements, which may lead again to other risks like legal fines and reputational damage and other aspects. So, in order to mitigate this risk, the best practice that the CSP and CSC should follow is they should conduct audits and assessments against industry standards like ISO 27001, 23, and they also need to understand the law of land and also need to identify the required legal and regulatory requirements, the compliance requirements, document them, and audit them and get that certified by an independent service providers. Yeah, that is how both CSP and CSC could able to ensure the implementation of control number 4. Now, coming to the next control, uh, if you look at ineffective risk management implementation and uh, in, ineffective control implementation is one of the risks that we are going to get if we are not going to implement the control 5. So for that, what we need to do, we need to ensure that we define and implement an audit management process. The audit management process should be, should have the audit plan. That audit team members should be available. They should be competent to conduct the audit, and all that should be there. And these things, all those audit plan, audit that, all to be followed in a sequential order. Make sure that once you send the plan, you call for the audit. While conducting the audit, you have to have opening meeting, you have to conduct the audit, then you have to have a closing meeting to discuss the findings. All that process you have to follow as part of your audit management process. So now when we are not going to implement these processes effectively, then you are going to have an ineffective control implementation and ineffective risk management implementation. Last control, if you are not going to implement, we are going to head into resource of, recurrence of non-conformities. If the audit findings that are being given to us during the audit are not being analyzed properly with proper root cause analysis tools and techniques, and if we are not going to come out with proper correction and corrective action, then we are going to get into the recurrence of non-conformities that also will make you to get into ineffective mitigation controls, and also it will lead to improper root cause analysis. So for making these things proper, what we need to ensure is that the findings of audit and assurance activities should be given due care and attention at appropriate levels. If a control deficiency is identified, then it should be prioritized, and it should be, then you have to come out with your correction and corrective action, root cause analysis. For conducting root cause analysis, you're supposed to use fishbone diagram, failure mode, and effects analysis, FMEA, 5Y analysis, and for root cause analysis requirements. So if we implement these controls properly, then we are going to meet the requirements of audit and assurance domain. Now, to conclude, what we need to ensure is that both CSPs and CSCs are responsible to implement audit and assurance controls as per CCM guidelines. Leverage the CCM mappings to guide the implementation of controls across multiple frameworks. And we have to maintain the audit charter and conduct risk-based audit and assurance assessment. and conduct audit and assurance through competent independent third-party auditors, follow secured audit management process, and follow standard remediation process for timely closure of all audit and assurance findings. Now, if you want to connect with Cloud Security Alliance, you can reach out through this support at cloudsecurityalliance.org, and you can reach out to all of us through these links given in the slide. That's it from our side. Thank you.
Thank you.